Welcome back to the Mental Space, and today we are live at the Wellbeing at the Workplace Summit here in Dubai. And today I am joined by Suzanne Gandy, who is the HR Director of Bayut and dubizzle. Now we're going to be talking that recent research from McKinsey that we have been unveiling and diving into all this past week and talking about how leadership has a responsibility to step in. Suzanne, welcome to the Mental Space.
Thank you very much.
Now, we've just come off stage talking about mental health. And one of the first things we started talking about was that recent McKinsey research that showed that 66% of people, workers in Dubai, well, actually the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Kuwait, all suffering with their mental health. Are those figures a surprise to you?
No, unfortunately, they're not a surprise. And I don't think this is a new emerging issue at all. I think this issue has always been there. I just think now we have got to a place of sophistication where employers and employees are more likely to talk about it.
Now, we looked at that research, and as you dove into it, it basically, you look at 60%, that's 18 million people. We've just been talking about leadership and the responsibility that leadership have. Why is it time for leaders to wake up for this?
Well, we could take it straight back to the dollar value of what's being lost because of these mental health concerns that we find are now being reported on. And because it's being reported on, it can be calculated. Yeah. And so if we were going to take the sort of the top line view of how much is being left on the table, because people aren't mentally in the best space to do the best work. Yeah. And also how much is it costing us already from the bottom line side of things with respect to lost days at work, people not being as productive as they could be. Now, of course, that's the dollar side. Then let's move it to the ethical side. Mm-hmm. Quite frankly, we have a duty of care as employers to look after our employees. And whilst, we could say, well, whose problem is it? Is it society's problem? Is it the healthcare system? Yeah. Is it the corporate's issue? Is it the individual's issue? Is it a family issue? It's a bit of everything. But because we spend so much time with our employees and because we are the main, as an employer, it is often the main source of stress and mental pressure. It is our responsibility to do something. So there is the dollar value side as to why it should be taken as an important factor from our leaders, but also there is the ethical and moral side of it, that we have a duty of care by rights as soon as we employ somebody.
It feels like for the longest time we've been trying to make the ethical argument and the economic argument has actually somehow lagged. But isn't that the key that unlocks all of this for the C-suites, in the fact that, and it's not just one or the other, it's actually both, that you can do both. And actually, if you invest in the ethical side, how you treat your people, that actually the economic argument begins to make much more sense. I mean, what's your experience been at, Bayut and dubizzle? What's your journey been? I
think the economic argument, it's almost like it shouldn't be an argument because it's a commonsensical thing. Yeah. And as soon as you start showing that you care about anybody, right? If you show you care about your fellow human being, if you give them time, if you listen to them, suddenly the relationship becomes stronger. Yeah. Suddenly they want to do more for you. And so the economic argument, or the economics prevail as a result of that. What we've found at Bayut and dubizzle is by having a very focused approach to well-being on the physical well-being, mental well-being, and financial well-being. And it's some of many, many different initiatives. So it's not just like one, it's not a one-size-fits-all, it's not a one thing. We have to do multiple streams of multiple initiatives in each of those three areas. And what we've seen is the metrics that HR specifically are always monitoring is our employee satisfaction rates, which have significantly increased, but also when we're losing good talent. We've worked really hard to create this sort of total holistic picture when it comes to what is our employer value proposition to the people who join us. And it's interesting work. Yes, it's being part of a fabulous brand, but it's also the fact that we have an enjoyable and fun workplace. There's always something going on. It's almost we're on the cusp of having too much communication of what is the next thing that we're going to either be celebrating or doing or acknowledging. And so it's the sum of the parts. And the normal metrics that I think any organization would look at is that the loss of good talent being one, but also, the flow of good employee satisfaction rates into more productive and high performance working environments, which naturally flows into getting more done and getting more revenue.
Okay. I mean, look, there's so much there that I could dive into. I mean, if we look at all the recent figures as well, like McKinsey showed that the rate of people who wanted to leave their jobs here was almost double what it was kind of like outside of the region. We looked at the Cigna research. They did their 360 Wellbeing survey, and they found that last year, 50% of people wanted to leave their jobs. And I think perhaps a lot of bosses just went, wow, yeah, well, they will say that. It's a survey. But then they went back this year and found out that 4 out of every 5 that said they were going to leave their jobs left their jobs. That's 40% of a company's resource. And they're probably not their bottom feeders. They're probably their most talented people. On the flip side of that, the Bupa executive survey also recently showed that 55% of bosses want to leave their jobs for a better work-life balance. And if we think about the leadership, they're not cheap hires. They're not easy hires as well. And I think Bupa actually called it the boss loss. So when you talk about staff attrition, I mean, like, how fundamentally vital is that to the future of a company? I remember PwC's US chairman recently went, the war on talent is over. Talent won. Where do you fall on that?
I don't think the war on talent is over.
Okay.
But I am wholly aware of the cost of losing certain talent from an organization. And so I think it's something that should be at the top of everybody's agenda to make sure that we're creating those environments where people are thriving and not just surviving, which is often the case here in this part of the world, because I think it's sort of accepted that people will do longer hours. Perhaps in other jurisdictions, there is more regulation about time in work mode and time where you're not in work mode. And in certain countries, you're not even allowed to contact your employees. So they actually get a time to switch off. Now, I think the higher up an organization you go, the more potentially you're expected to be a bit more 24/7. And so it doesn't surprise me that at that level, people are looking to have more of a work-life balance. And I think there's a lot that organizations can do and are doing to assist with that. And I go back to the basics. Let's talk about that. The health insurance coverage that does, now incorporate that mental health space, which is quite a new thing for this region.
Yes, totally.
So we're looking if we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we're trying to work our way up each bit, then making sure that people have got that good total reward, and then, to try and take some of the financial impact, which is also a major mental health impact there. And then looking right up to now, what are we doing to allow people to get that kind of into that space of self-actualization and have things in a place where they can actually enjoy what and where and who they are doing their work with. And, some of the real positives I've seen coming out of this region is, we use the word hybrid working a lot. But no one can actually define it down to, what does it actually mean? And often it means different things to different people. But I think having an environment where you're more about the productivity and the performance and the achievement of your goals over, are you present in the office from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or whatever the working hours might be. And I think that sort of mindset shift also was really accelerated during COVID, where no one was in the office, right? So we had to start trusting people more, and we had to start finding other ways to measure how people were performing other than, well, I can see them, so they must be working. But it does, it is a very personal thing also for the leaders. And I think there's a lot to be done in the space. When I say there's a lot being done, but there's a lot still to be done, I think there's a lot of education level for leaders to build great teams that then they can trust to the point where they can actually say, I trust you're actually going to get on with the work, even if I can't see you here.
I know. I spoke to one organisation who basically they had all their employees back in the office. They trusted them all the way through COVID, and then brought them all back. And I know that the employees asked that organisation, well, why don't you trust us anymore? And the response was that during the pandemic, all the high performers continued to be high performers. During the sort of middling performers, maybe slipped a little bit. And the low performers continued being the low performers or even worse. So they brought everyone back in and caused this dissatisfaction amongst the workforce to lean towards the lowest common denominator in their business, thus driving a lot of the high performers out of the business. It seems like leaders are still having a bit of a struggle to let go of the older ways, the more traditional ways. And do you think we've now, though, however, crossed an inflection point? Like, there are so many people, so many leaders that would love to put this all back in the box that it used to be in.
Yeah.
But I think that Pandora's box has well and truly been opened on this.
It's kind of been thrown out the window by now. As an organisation, at Bayut and dubizzle, we've always had the office open. Obviously, we're not during lockdown, but even during lockdown, we had buddy systems where people would have to kind of look out for each other. Even everyone's got their leaders and their supervisors and stuff, but there was a buddy system as well to look after people. But if we go to that space where, why did we brought people back into the office, but we didn't make it okay, we're straight back into the office on that very regimented sort of process again. Because apart from anything else, we've got an awful lot of employees, and they're actually, I can talk especially from my team. There's a number of people in my team who at times they need to be in the office because they need that stakeholder engagement. They need to have those collaborative sessions with people. And at times they don't need to be in the office. I take our talent acquisition team, for example. If they're trying to really get to the bottom of a particular role that's quite a tricky role, it's best to do that face to face and have a real conversation about what's happening in the business. But then when it comes to screening through candidates, phoning candidates, starting to do the interview process and arranging all that, they could be anywhere. And I think it's about understanding the work that people are doing and understanding the boundaries that will allow that person to have a lot more flexibility. And I do agree with you that we're kind of past the point of no return. But we've also got to be mindful that we're talking much in the space here of those people who work in offices.
Of course.
And a large proportion of our workforce, especially in the dubizzle brand, are out there. They're inspecting cars, and they are out there taking photographs, and they've got a very hands-on role that is often meeting the needs of our customers.
And we can't stop the conversation there, can we? Can we just, so it's an easy thing to say to a creative industry or an office-bound industry, oh, yes, your well-being is taken care of because we can bring in this fluidity, we can bring in this flexibility. And I guess, it's retail, it's construction, it's hospitality, it's our frontline workers, our doctors, our nurses. We have to kind of have a deeper conversation about the culture that we're creating, because not every job will come with that flexibility.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned about the culture, and I think a lot of the time the cultures that get created in organizations, you can also have these micro cultures at team level.
Yeah.
And that can be very much led by the role modeling of the leader and what they do. And then you see that replicated, through the different levels of that team. And so I think from an organisation standpoint, when we're looking at those other roles where maybe it's not so easy to go on a flexible timing or a flexible location or whatever it might be, is to look at, how much are those leaders showing that they care about their employees, and what are they doing to actually put their thoughts and what they say into action on the ground, to truly be caring for their employees. So, and I think some of the speakers today have really touched on that too.
Absolutely. Talking about the front line, we were on stage and you were telling us that you were actually in the army for eight years.
Look.
I mean, you could look at the army and go, this is one of the most traditional hierarchical organisations in the world. But what was your experience of mental health there? And what did it teach you about sort of mental health and well-being while you were inside the army? What lessons did you take away?
The military, I think, has gone through a rapid change, and I talk about the British military in this particular instance because that's where my experience comes from. There's a couple of things that there were a lot of initiatives when I was being trained to be an army officer that were very much about putting the mental health of our soldiers right at the center of everything, because it was well understood that any soldier who is struggling in that space not only can endanger themselves, but it can endanger the people around them.
Yes.
And so in the very sense of survival, it was so important that was very much at the center of what we were doing. And so we had a lot of training in that space as we were going through that sort of young officer space and then into the ranks as well. But then if we look at, well, how did it actually work out when we would go on operational tours? And there was a absolute responsibility on the platoon commander to know each and every one of those people in your platoon, to really understand, even just simple things about their personal lives, like, are they married? Have they got kids? And then start digging into that to really understand then what was motivating people, what was driving them, what they liked, what they did not like. And there's a certain level of privilege that you have when you live in a very isolated space in the middle of nowhere, with people that you are working with and surviving with, that you have to get to know each other. But if somebody, we were very much aware of what were the signs of someone not in their best space.
Yes.
And because we'd been trained and because we had, this was a topic of conversation the entire time, especially in my regiment, and that, I was going out doing fuel convoys every day and protecting fuel convoys. And if you've got a guy behind the driving wheel, but in the driving seat of a fuel truck who's got something on his mind that's going on back in the UK, or a lady, driving her truck who something's happened and that's in the back of her mind too, they're not going to be fully engaged whilst we're going through quite tricky environments where you're supposed to be looking for combat indicators of things that are going to cause you harm. And so there was a vested interest to really, really put mental health at the forefront of what we were doing, and we'd take action. And it wasn't to penalise people, it was actually with all due intent to help people, and it might be you could help them directly as a platoon commander and just be someone that they needed to talk to. You could give them some more space to go and make some more phone calls and talk to people at home. You could reach out to some of the multi-faith padres that we have that would also be there. And of course, we had all the medics with us too. So we had a number of avenues that were open to us that we could call upon.
It sounds like you just described what empathetic leadership should actually look like. One thing that struck me as well about the army is that, that doesn't happen 100% in the corporate world, which is, you talked about Sandhurst. In the army, people are taught how to lead.
Yeah.
And are taught leadership skills.
Yeah.
Whereas in the corporate world, often we have people promoted into leadership positions because they're good at a process.
Yes.
And they understand a process well. But their ability to lead teams of peoples into, high pressure environments, whether that be deadlines, whatever that might be, it feels like we're really lacking this ability to lead. I know in my profession as a journalist coming up, we were never taught how to be a team leader.
Yeah.
What did Sandhurst teach you about leadership, and how much of that do you think the corporate world actually needs to learn from?
I think the corporate world is aware of it. It just doesn't necessarily put it into action. And what's going through that very intensive leadership training process showed me was that, yes, of course, there is some innate skills that people might have or some tendencies that they might have towards leadership, but ultimately it is a teachable skill.
Yeah.
And yes, it does then involve a mindset shift and a behavior change to actually be the leader that you aspire to be. But to know that in the first place is an education. And so what I've done in all the companies that I've worked for here in the UAE, I worked for the DMCC Free Zone previously. One of the key things I implemented there was a leadership academy.
Yeah.
I'm now at Bayut and dubizzle. and responsible for the Middle East offices. And literally this Monday, we launched our Level Up Leadership Program.
Incredible.
Which starts with a 360-degree assessment. And I think, there is a need from corporates to have people in supervisory positions to manage the work. And it is, I think, a failing on the corporate's behalf when they don't give people the skills before they get into that role. Mm-hmm. And, every organisation I've ever worked in has always suffered from the same thing. But I think people are more aware of it now. And then it takes, to actually implement leadership programs.
Because also when we look at the McKinsey research, it tells us that actually toxic cultures are on the increase. Now, often it seems to me that one of the drivers of toxic cultures are very insecure leaders. And that's when you say, again, to your point, that that leaders should have this training before they actually hit the ground running as a leader.
Yeah.
Because often it is that kind of bombastic, I don't know what I'm doing, I've got imposter syndrome, I'm insecure, how dare you question me, the only thing I can do is slam down on you and then start beginning that toxic culture.
Yeah.
Fascinating. You've been really super generous with your time. Look, the headlines from yesterday, I'm going to have to ask you your opinion of them. So 4-day week, we had the UK findings from a 6-month project, I think 61,000 businesses or something like that. Report back, profitability up, productivity up, absenteeism down, presenteeism down, stress down, burnout down, massive reduction in attrition. Here we're lucky enough to be in the UAE, where we've already taken one step to a 4.5 working day week. I think the hot money is on the fact that it's not that long before we follow suit and actually go for a 4-day working week. But what's your opinion of that? I mean, that is one wellness approach. But embracing that wellness approach, 88% of the companies that were involved in that experiment said we're keeping it. 15% of the people that were on it said you couldn't pay me enough to go back to a 5-day working week.
Yeah, and I think it's no surprise of all the metrics pointing towards the fact that a 4-day working week is very good for the individuals, and it's shown with the business statistics showing that it's been good for business as well. But it's not the first time that we've gone to 4-day working weeks in history. When you look back through sort of industrialization and everything else, we've gone from 7, 5, 4, 6. There's periods in time where this has happened. Even in the downturn in 2009, a lot of the larger multinationals did give people the option to go to a 4-day working week, but the difference there was that they reduced salaries in alignment to that.
Yeah. Whereas in this one, it was 100%.
They kept the salaries, which I think is really, really interesting on this one. I think the UAE's week change going from the Sunday to Thursday to Monday to Friday did make everyone rethink, how do we do our work? And, on a Friday, we're particularly flexible for people to go and to meet the needs of their faiths. We don't just say, well, it's a Friday is just for our Muslim employees. Actually, it's people of any faith.
Yeah.
And they're given the time to go and do what they're... And we're not... Again, I go back to what I said earlier. We're not so hung up on the timing. It's more about getting the work done. But of course, on the flip side, and there's always a flip side to these things, we have customers' needs to meet.
Yes.
We have people who want to buy and sell cars in the dubizzle side of things, and they're not going to do that during working hours. They're going to do that in the evenings,
Absolutely.
on the weekends,
Yeah.
or the husband or the wife is going to get sent, during the week. But that's actually sort of a smaller level of footfall, and so. To be a thriving business, you have to put your customers first, and then you have to get creative. Once you've met the needs of the customers, okay, then how do we help that translate into something much better for our employees? We're still on that journey.
Yeah.
We're definitely still on that journey. And I think one of our speakers earlier also mentioned there's a lot of foundational things that need to be resolved or addressed here in the UAE. But I do see that with the different generations coming in, the different expectations of what work is. I think those expectations have always been there. It's just the vocal level of the new generation.
See, I was going to let you off. I was going to let you off on this question, but I'm not now. So, and another piece we did the other day was about Gen Z. BBC reported the global findings from the Cigna 360,
Yes.
which was that 95% of Gen Z were stressed, which was above
Yeah.
the 88% level. Actually, here in the UAE, because Mentl, we actually sat with Cigna 360 and launched the UAE findings. It's actually higher. It's 98% here.
Doesn't surprise me.
And we wrote a piece basically kind of comparing what the workplace was like when I went into the workplace.
We went into the workplace, yeah.
I think I predated you a little bit, but what they're coming into now.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness me, the ferocity of some of the comments coming back from the audience, some of who I don't think had actually read the article. You know, it was more they'd reacted to the share on social media. Lazy, spoiled. All these kind of like entitled. Mm-hmm. Are they that bad, the Gen Z? Because I think I want to stand up for them. I think we were almost entitled.
Well, I was going to say exactly that. I'm sure if you ask my parents' generation about, us when we left, say, for example, school or university, they would probably say exactly the same. And so, again, it's not a new problem. It's just something that is being researched and reported on a lot more. But there is a world of difference between where we were as a workplace back in the 90s,
yes.
when laptops were just coming in and
we didn't even have internet
and exactly
email,
Wi-Fi to where we are now, where people are glued to their phones. And often I think that the stress is not just coming from work. It's coming from that multiple sources that is constantly bombarding people all the time. And so, yes, we can say that people are stressed at work, but is it actually just the workplace that's stressing them out? I think no. I think that it's the nature of the way we are as a society at the moment.
I mean, I hear statements like, well, we were miserable, they should be miserable too. And at the same time, like, I agree with you. I've taken Facebook off my phone because I just fed up of reading the snark and the nastiness there. We are in this very polarized world right now. And we are in a much accelerated world from when we entered the world. The thing that strikes me is that there's so little compassion, because these kids coming into the workplace, they haven't even stopped growing yet. Their physical maturity. Yeah. We've had decades to build resilience and emotional intelligence to kind of get there. And the research says that even we hate this right now.
Yeah.
So why are we not so empathetic? It almost feels like abused becomes the abuser.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And you asked me about the military earlier, and that was one of the key things they were trying to stop was, well, just because I had it hard, that means I'm going to give you guys a hard time because it's my job to toughen you lot up. Mm-hmm. And actually, no, that's not the case. You don't have to, put people into an environment and make them find coping strategies so they can, get through without too much damage to themselves. Yeah. Actually, you can help people. And this is where the whole equity piece comes in the D&I, which is, some people do need a little bit more help.
Yeah.
But be open to that and be, say, well, no one's the same. There's no blueprint for the employee that you're bringing through the door as such that you go, this person and this person are going to respond exactly the same. So you have to be open to the needs of different people. And that's where I go back to things like wellbeing initiatives having to be so many parts.
Yes.
Because not everything is going to be right for everybody. If we go back to the piece of research about our Gen Z and how much pressure is put on them and how unforgiving perhaps our generation do appear to be, I think it's the minorities of our generation are maybe a little unforgiving. But I think the majority of us go, there is more possibility for change here, number one. We're in the positions now to be the advocates and the catalysts of that change because we're at that sort of level. But also the fact that our interns and graduates that we hire into Bayut and dubizzle, they are so successful when they go into their main sort of first level roles with the organisation. That's one of our key talent pools.
And we can't just roll our eyes and just go, oh, they are so entitled. They are the future. Yeah. And if you are a company, you're a technology company. Yeah. If you want to identify the next sort of wave of disruption, what is the next innovation so you can stay relevant?
It's going to come from these people.
It's not going to be
right?
me in your company that's, well, it might be, I'm quite tech savvy, but anyway, yeah, exactly. Suzanne, thank you. It's been great to get your thoughts on the mental space today.
My pleasure.
What last question is exciting you most when you look at 2023 and above, when we talk about well-being in the workplace? What gives you optimism and hope?
What gives me the most optimism and hope is that I am seeing an absolute shift in HR. Now, HR historically has been a bit people administration.
Yeah. Policy police sometimes.
Yeah, the organisation's police, they make sure all the paperwork's done and people are getting paid on time, we would hope. And what I've seen in the time that I've been here in the Middle East is a significant shift towards the professionalisation of HR. And what comes with that is more knowledgeable practitioners in organisations influencing the ultimate decision makers, influencing the leaders, and also providing a much better service to our employees that makes for a much better employee-employer relationship, being balanced rather than the employer being the one that holds all the power and the employees being, not
that
so
dynamic
powerful.
is changing.
The dynamic's definitely changing, and I think with more and more professional HR practitioners who are more knowledgeable and have really bought into this whole link between focusing on employee well-being ultimately impacts your company's performance extremely positively. It can only be a winner. So that's what I'm really looking forward to and happy about, that I see that change already.
That feels like a mic drop moment, even though you're not holding the microphone. Suzanne, thank you again for your time here in the mental space.
My pleasure.
If you want to listen to more conversations like this, please remember that you can subscribe on the podcast platform of choice, or indeed hit subscribe on YouTube, and join us again soon for more conversations. Thank you.